I watched in horror as Sheriff Corinne Thompson stood beside my demolished cabin, her arms crossed, wearing that same cold smile she had when she destroyed my family's legacy. The bulldozers were still running, their engines drowning out my protests. But what she did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had just discovered something in my grandfather's old papers. Something that would turn her victory into the biggest mistake of her corrupt career. The entire yacht club she was so proud of was built on my land. 3 generations of my family had called this place home. The cabin sat on the eastern shore of Crystal Lake, surrounded by towering pines and wild blueberry bushes that my grandmother had planted decades ago. Every morning, I would wake to the sound of loons calling across the still water, their haunting voices echoing off the granite cliffs on the far shore. My grandfather built this cabin with his own hands in 1952, after he returned from the war. The logs were cut from trees on the property, the stone chimney quarried from the same granite that formed the lake bed. Every beam, every board, every nail had been placed with love and the hope that someday his children and grandchildren would find peace here. I had been coming to this lake since I was old enough to hold a fishing rod. My father taught me to cast from the weathered dock, the same dock where I later taught my own son. The cabin walls were covered with photographs spanning 70 years. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, and quiet evenings by the fire. This was not just a building. This was the heart of our family history. The community around Crystal Lake had always been tight-knit. Most of the families had been here for generations, just like mine. We looked out for each other, shared tools and meals, and gathered every 4th of July for a potluck on the shore. Life moved slowly here, the way it should, the way it was supposed to. That changed when Sheriff Corinne Thompson arrived in town. She came with expensive tastes and even more expensive friends. Word spread quickly that she had big plans for Crystal Lake, plans that involved transforming our quiet corner of paradise into something exclusive and profitable. I first saw her on a crisp October morning, standing on the public boat launch with a group of well-dressed strangers. They pointed across the water toward my cabin, their voices carrying in the still air. Even from a distance, I could see the calculating look in her eyes as she surveyed my property like a general planning a conquest. She wore her uniform like armor, every button polished, every crease sharp. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her cold blue eyes missed nothing. When she turned those eyes toward my cabin, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The strangers with her were clearly not locals. Designer clothes, expensive watches, the kind of people who measured everything in dollar signs. They spoke in hushed tones about property values and development potential, their words drifting across the water like a threat. That evening, as I sat on my dock watching the sunset paint the lake gold and crimson, I had no idea that my peaceful life was about to become a war zone. I had no idea that Sheriff Corinne Thompson had already decided my cabin was an obstacle to be removed. The first official visit came on a Tuesday morning in November. I was splitting firewood behind the cabin when I heard the crunch of gravel under tires. A patrol car pulled into my driveway, followed by a black SUV with tinted windows. Sheriff Corinne Thompson stepped out of the patrol car, adjusting her gun belt and straightening her shoulders like she was preparing for battle. She was shorter than she appeared from a distance, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who was used to getting her way. Her face was perfectly made up, not a hair out of place, as if she had stopped at a salon before coming to ruin my day. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice honey-sweet but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "I need to speak with you about your property." 3 men in expensive suits climbed out of the SUV. They stayed by their vehicle, but I could feel their eyes on me, evaluating, calculating. These were the yacht club investors I had heard whispers about in town. "What about my property?" I asked, setting down my axe but keeping my hands visible. Something about her demeanor told me this was not a social call. Karen pulled out a folder thick with official-looking papers. "We have received multiple complaints about your cabin. Zoning violations, environmental concerns, public safety issues. The county is planning to improve public access to the lake, and your structure is blocking the proposed walkway." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. This cabin has been here for 70 years. My grandfather built it with proper permits. What zoning violations? Her smile never wavered, but her eyes grew colder. "Times change. Regulations change. The county needs this land for public access. We are prepared to offer you fair market value for your cooperation." One of the suit-wearing men stepped forward, holding a check. "We understand this property has sentimental value, but this offer is quite generous, enough to buy something nice somewhere else." I looked at the check. The amount was insulting, maybe 10% of what the land was actually worth. "This is not for sale. This is my family's home." Karen's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. "Sir, I am trying to help you here. The county has the authority to claim this land through eminent domain if necessary. It would be much easier for everyone if you accepted our generous offer." "And if I refuse?" The smile returned, but it was sharper now, like broken glass. "Then I will have to do my job as sheriff. I will have to investigate every complaint that comes in, every building code violation, every environmental concern, every safety issue. I take my responsibilities very seriously." The threat hung in the air between us like smoke from a gun barrel. She was telling me that my life would become a living hell if I did not surrender my family's legacy to her and her wealthy friends. "I need time to think about this," I said, knowing I would never sell but hoping to buy myself some breathing room. "Of course," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Take all the time you need. But remember, the county's needs come first. Public safety comes first. And I always put the needs of the community above the wants of any individual." She handed me her business card, letting her fingers linger on mine just long enough to make me uncomfortable. "Call me when you are ready to be reasonable." As they drove away, I stood in my driveway holding that business card, my hands shaking with anger and something else. Fear. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of the police. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I could see in Sheriff Karen Thompson's eyes that she would do anything to get what she wanted. That night, I sat by the fire in my grandfather's chair, staring at the family photographs on the mantel. I had no idea how far she was willing to go. I had no idea that she had already decided I was an enemy to be destroyed. The harassment began 3 days later. I woke to the sound of a diesel engine idling in my driveway at 5 in the morning. Deputy Martinez was parked outside my cabin, his spotlight aimed directly at my bedroom window. "Noise complaint," he said when I stumbled outside in my bathrobe. "Someone reported loud music coming from this address." I stared at him in disbelief. "It is 5 in the morning. I was asleep." He shrugged and made a note on his clipboard. "Just doing my job, keep it down." The next day brought a building inspector who found a dozen violations that had never existed before. The dock needed permits, the septic system required updating, the electrical wiring was apparently a fire hazard. Each violation came with hefty fines and impossible deadlines. "Funny thing," the inspector said as he wrote citation after citation. Sheriff Thompson specifically asked me to take a close look at this property, said there might be safety concerns. The health department arrived the following week. They found mysterious contamination in my well water, the kind that would require expensive remediation. When I demanded to see the test results, they claimed the paperwork had been lost. My truck tires were slashed twice in 1 week. My mailbox was knocked down so many times I stopped replacing it. Someone cut my power lines 3 times, always at night, always when Deputy Martinez was conveniently patrolling the other side of town. The worst part was watching my neighbors choose sides. Some avoided eye contact when I drove past, afraid of becoming targets themselves. Others whispered behind my back at the general store, speculating about what I had done to deserve such attention from law enforcement. Karen herself made regular appearances, always in uniform, always with that satisfied smile when she saw the toll her campaign was taking on me. She would park at the end of my driveway and just sit there, watching, like a predator studying wounded prey. "Having any problems lately?" she asked during one of these visits, her voice dripping with false concern. "I heard there have been some issues with your property. Building violations, safety concerns, must be stressful." I stared at her through my kitchen window, my hands clenched into fists. She waved at me like we were old friends, then drove away laughing. The yacht club members circled like vultures, making increasingly aggressive offers to buy my land. They appeared at my door at all hours, their checkbooks ready, their smiles hungry. Each offer was higher than the last, but still a fraction of what the property was actually worth. "Be smart about this," one of them said, a thin man with cold eyes and expensive clothes. "The sheriff is just going to keep making your life difficult until you see reason. Why suffer when you could be rich?" Sleep became impossible. Every sound made me jump. Every car that slowed down made my heart race. I installed security cameras, changed the locks, even bought a shotgun that I kept loaded by my bed. The lake that had once brought me peace now felt like a prison surrounded by enemies. The harassment campaign was brilliant in its simplicity. Nothing Karen did was technically illegal. She was just doing her job, investigating complaints, enforcing regulations. The fact that all the complaints came from her friends, and all the regulations had been selectively applied to my property, was impossible to prove. I called the state police, but they referred me back to the county sheriff's department. I contacted a lawyer, but harassment cases were difficult to prove, especially when the harassment was coming from law enforcement itself. I was trapped in a nightmare with no apparent way out. Late at night, sitting in my grandfather's chair with the shotgun across my knees, I would stare at the family photographs and wonder if I was fighting a battle I could never win. Karen had the badge, the authority, and the backing of wealthy investors. All I had was a 70-year-old cabin and the stubborn refusal to surrender. But stubborn runs in my family. My grandfather had not surrendered when the bank tried to foreclose during the Depression. My father had not surrendered when developers first tried to buy the lake in the 1980s. And I would not surrender now, no matter what Sheriff Karen Thompson threw at me. The morning that changed everything started with the rumble of heavy machinery rolling down my quiet dirt road. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering in my chest as the sound grew louder and closer. Through my bedroom window, I saw them coming like an invasion force. Bulldozers, excavators, dump trucks, and backing them up, Sheriff Karen Thompson's patrol car. I rushed outside in my pajamas and bare feet, the November cold biting my skin as I ran toward the convoy of destruction. Karen stood beside her car, arms crossed, wearing dark sunglasses and a smile of pure satisfaction. She looked like a general about to watch an enemy fortress fall. "Stop!" I shouted over the rumble of diesel engines. "You cannot do this. This is my property." Deputy Martinez grabbed my arm as I tried to run toward the lead bulldozer. "Sir, you need to stay back. This is official county business." "What official business?" I struggled against his grip, my voice cracking with desperation. "Show me the permits. Show me the court order." Karen walked over slowly, enjoying every second of my anguish. She pulled a folder from her car and waved it in the air. "Eminent domain proceedings. Public safety hazard. The county is claiming this land for public lake access." "That is impossible. You cannot just take someone's land without due process." Her smile widened. "The process was followed. You just were not paying attention. Now step back and let these men do their work." The first bulldozer lurched forward, its massive blade scraping against the cabin's foundation. The sound was like fingernails on a chalkboard, like the screaming of something alive being torn apart. I watched in horror as the blade bit into the logs my grandfather had cut and fitted with his own hands. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Let me get my family photographs, my grandfather's tools. Just give me 5 minutes." Karen shook her head. "Too dangerous. The structure could collapse at any moment." But that was a lie. The cabin was solid, built to last generations. They were destroying it simply because they could, because Karen enjoyed watching me suffer. The demolition was not about public safety or lake access. It was about breaking me, about showing me who had the real power. The dining room wall came down first, taking with it 70 years of family Christmas mornings. The kitchen followed, the hand-carved cabinets my father had made splintering like kindling. Family photographs scattered in the wind like autumn leaves, irreplaceable memories trampled under steel treads. I fell to my knees in the driveway, sobbing as I watched my grandfather's rocking chair disappear under tons of debris. The stone fireplace, built from granite quarried on the property, crumbled like a sandcastle. The bedroom where 3 generations of my family had slept their first nights at the lake was reduced to rubble in minutes. "This will make a beautiful pathway," Karen said, raising her voice over the noise of destruction. "The yacht club members will love having easy access to their boats. Progress is sometimes painful, but it is necessary." Something inside me broke in that moment, something fundamental and irreplaceable. The last trace of respect I had for authority, for the system, for the idea that justice would eventually prevail, crumbled along with the cabin walls. I knelt in the ruins of my family's legacy, surrounded by the debris of everything I had loved, and felt something dark and cold take root in my chest. The demolition took less than 2 hours. 70 years of memories, 3 generations of family history, reduced to a pile of broken wood and shattered stone. The bulldozers moved with mechanical efficiency, pushing the debris into piles, preparing the site for the yacht club's exclusive pathway to the lake. When it was over, Karen walked through the rubble, picking her way carefully in her polished boots. She stopped in front of me, pulled off her sunglasses, and looked down at me with those cold blue eyes. "I told you this would be easier if you cooperated," she said. "But you had to be stubborn. You had to make this difficult. I hope you learned something today about fighting battles you cannot win." She turned and walked back to her patrol car, leaving me kneeling in the ruins of my life. As the convoy drove away, the silence that followed was more deafening than the roar of the bulldozers had been. I was alone with the wreckage, alone with my grief, alone with the cold fire of rage that was beginning to burn in my chest. That night I slept in my truck, parked where my cabin had stood just hours before. And as I lay there staring at the stars through the windshield, I made a promise to my grandfather's memory and to myself. Sheriff Corinne Thompson thought she had won. She thought she had broken me. But she had made the biggest mistake of her corrupt career. She had pushed too far, destroyed too much, and awakened something in me that would not rest until justice was served. 3 days after the demolition, I was sitting in a storage unit across town, sorting through boxes of family documents that I had rescued from my grandfather's attic years earlier. My hands shook as I opened each box, looking for anything that might help me understand what legal rights I still had, if any. The third box contained my great-grandfather's papers from the 1920s. Land deeds, survey maps, correspondence with lawyers, all yellowed with age but still legible. I spread the documents across the concrete floor of the storage unit, trying to piece together the history of our family's connection to Crystal Lake. That was when I found it. A survey map dated 1923, hand-drawn in careful ink, showing the original property boundaries. I stared at the map, tracing the lines with my finger, trying to understand what I was seeing. According to this survey, my great-grandfather had not purchased just the cabin lot. He had purchased the entire eastern shoreline of Crystal Lake. My hands trembled as I found the corresponding deed, signed by the previous landowner and witnessed by the county clerk. The legal description was clear and detailed. My family owned not just the demolished cabin site, but every inch of shoreline from the northern inlet to the southern creek, including the underwater land extending 50 feet into the lake itself. I drove straight to the county courthouse, clutching the documents like sacred relics. The clerk in the records office was an elderly woman who had worked there for 30 years. She looked at my great-grandfather's deed with interest, then pulled up the current property records on her computer. "This is strange," she said, frowning at her screen. "The current records show the shoreline as public property, but your document clearly indicates private ownership. Let me check the survey files." 20 minutes later, she returned with a puzzled expression and a stack of survey maps. "Someone has altered the modern records," she said quietly. "Your original deed is legitimate, but the property lines were changed in the county database sometime in the last 5 years. The shoreline was reclassified as public land without any legal justification." The pieces began falling into place like dominoes. I drove to the lake and walked along the shoreline, looking at the yacht club with new eyes. Every dock, every boathouse, every inch of the exclusive development sat on land that legally belonged to me. Corinne and her wealthy friends had built their empire on stolen property. I hired a property lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Martinez who specialized in land disputes. When I showed her the documents, her eyes widened with professional excitement. "This is massive," she said, spreading the survey maps across her conference table. "If these documents are authentic, and I believe they are, then you own not just the shoreline but everything built on it. We are talking about tens of millions of dollars in illegal development." Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca and her team worked like forensic accountants, uncovering the scope of the conspiracy. The property records had been systematically altered to hide my family's ownership. Environmental impact studies had been falsified to allow construction on supposedly public land. Building permits had been issued without proper legal foundation. "This goes deeper than we thought," Rebecca told me during one of our meetings. "Sheriff Thompson did not just steal your land. She orchestrated a massive fraud involving county officials, developers, and possibly state environmental agencies. She needed your cabin destroyed to complete the illusion that the entire shoreline was public property." The more we investigated, the more corruption we found. Bribed inspectors, falsified surveys, backdated permits, and a paper trail that led directly to Sheriff Corinne Thompson's office. She had been planning this for years, systematically laying the groundwork to steal my family's inheritance and hand it over to her wealthy friends. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had assumed that a simple country family would not have kept detailed records going back a century. She had assumed that my great-grandfather's carefully preserved documents had been lost or destroyed over the decades. As I sat in Rebecca's office, looking at the evidence spread across her conference table, I felt something I had not felt since the morning of the demolition. Hope. Not just hope for justice, but hope for something sweeter. Revenge. Sheriff Corinne Thompson thought she had destroyed me, thought she had won her war against my family. But the war was just beginning, and now I held all the ammunition I needed to destroy her completely. Rebecca Martinez worked like a woman possessed, and her legal team grew by the week as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. We met in her conference room every few days, the table covered with maps, deeds, photographs, and legal documents that painted a picture of corruption reaching into the highest levels of county government. "We need to be surgical about this," Rebecca explained during one of our strategy sessions. "If we file a single lawsuit, they will circle the wagons and start destroying evidence. We need to hit them from multiple directions simultaneously, like a coordinated military strike." The plan she outlined was breathtaking in its complexity. Property fraud charges against the developers, civil rights violations against Sheriff Thompson for abuse of power, environmental fraud charges for the falsified impact studies, conspiracy charges against the county officials who had altered the property records. We would file everything at once in different courts, making it impossible for them to mount a coordinated defense. While Rebecca built the legal case, I worked on gathering additional evidence. I installed hidden cameras around the lake, documenting the yacht club's illegal use of my shoreline. I recorded conversations with neighbors who had been pressured to support the development. I collected photographs of every structure built on my stolen land. The hardest part was maintaining the appearance of defeat. I continued living in a cheap motel across town, playing the role of the broken man who had lost everything to Sheriff Thompson's power. When yacht club members saw me at the grocery store, they smirked and whispered among themselves about the crazy hermit who had thought he could fight the system. Corinne herself made regular appearances around town, basking in her victory. She gave interviews to the local newspaper about the successful development project, about how sometimes tough decisions had to be made for the greater good. She spoke at the Rotary Club about the importance of progress, about not letting sentiment stand in the way of economic development. "Some people refuse to accept change," she said during one of these speeches, her words reported in the newspaper the next day. "But as sheriff, I have to think about what is best for the entire community, not just one individual's attachment to the past." Meanwhile, Rebecca's investigation uncovered evidence that went far beyond simple property theft. We discovered that Corinne had used her position as sheriff to intimidate other property owners around the lake, forcing them to sell their land at below-market prices to the yacht club developers. We found records of campaign contributions from the developers to county commissioners who had voted to approve the project. We uncovered emails discussing how to handle the cabin problem that made it clear the demolition had been planned months in advance. "She got greedy," Rebecca said, reviewing bank records that showed suspicious payments to county officials. "If she had just stolen your land, we might have had a property dispute, but she turned it into a criminal conspiracy involving dozens of people and millions of dollars." The media strategy was equally important. Rebecca contacted investigative journalists from the state capitol, environmental groups who opposed illegal lakefront development, and civil rights organizations who specialized in police corruption cases. When the story broke, it would have maximum impact. We also prepared for Corinne's inevitable counterattack. She would try to use her authority as sheriff to intimidate witnesses, destroy evidence, and turn the investigation back on me. Rebecca obtained restraining orders preventing Corinne from interfering with our investigation. We made copies of all evidence and stored them in multiple secure locations. The yacht club's grand opening ceremony was scheduled for the first weekend in December. The event would feature ribbon cutting, media coverage, and speeches by local politicians who had supported the development. Corinne had personally invited the governor, 3 congressmen, and the state attorney general. It was going to be her moment of ultimate triumph. It was also going to be the perfect moment to destroy her. The more public the event, the bigger the impact when the truth comes out, Rebecca explained. We will serve the legal papers right in front of the cameras, right in front of all her powerful friends. By the time the evening news airs, Corinne Thompson will be finished. As December approached, I found myself sleeping better than I had in months. The nightmares about bulldozers and demolished cabins were replaced by dreams of justice. Sheriff Corinne Thompson had used her badge to steal my family's legacy, but she had also given me something more valuable than she could possibly imagine. She had given me the chance to expose her corruption to the world, to destroy her career and her reputation as completely as she had destroyed my grandfather's cabin. The trap was set. The evidence was gathered. The legal papers were prepared. All that remained was to spring it at the moment of her greatest triumph, turning her victory celebration into the worst day of her corrupt life. The morning of the yacht club's grand opening dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made Crystal Lake look like a postcard. Television news trucks began arriving early, followed by catering vehicles, and a sound crew setting up speakers for the ceremony. Sheriff Corinne Thompson had spared no expense in making this the social event of the year. I watched from across the lake as guests began arriving. Expensive cars wound down the private road to the yacht club, discharging politicians, business leaders, and social elite. Corinne stood at the entrance greeting everyone, resplendent in a new uniform with extra ribbons and commendations she had awarded herself. She looked like a woman who had conquered the world. At 11 o'clock, Rebecca Martinez and her legal team met me at the public boat launch. We loaded boxes of documents into 3 boats, along with a dozen witnesses who would testify to the fraud. Rebecca wore her best court suit and carried herself with the confidence of a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument. "Remember," she told me as we crossed the lake, "stay calm no matter what she says or does. We have the law on our side, but only if we handle this professionally." The yacht club's dock was crowded with guests holding champagne glasses and admiring the new facilities. A red ribbon stretched across the main walkway, waiting for the ceremonial cutting. Local television cameras recorded everything, and I could see Corinne positioning herself for maximum coverage. We tied our boats to the public dock at the far end of the shoreline and walked toward the celebration. I carried my great-grandfather's original deed in a waterproof case, while Rebecca's assistants wheeled boxes of evidence on portable carts. The crowd began to notice our approach, their conversations trailing off as they realized something unexpected was happening. Corinne saw us coming and her face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion gave way to anger, then to something that looked almost like fear before settling into cold fury. She strode toward us, her hand resting on her gun belt, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to intimidating people into submission. "You are trespassing on private property," she announced loudly enough for the news cameras to hear. I am ordering you to leave immediately." Rebecca stepped forward with a smile that could have cut glass. "Actually, Sheriff Thompson, you are the one who is trespassing. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, my name is Rebecca Martinez, and I represent the legal owner of this entire shoreline." She gestured toward me, and I held up my great-grandfather's deed for the cameras to see. This document, signed in 1923 and filed with the county clerk, establishes that my client's family has owned this land for over a century. Every structure you see here, every dock, every building of this yacht club sits on stolen property. The crowd fell silent except for the whir of television cameras. Corinne's face had gone pale, but she recovered quickly, her voice shaking with rage. "That is ridiculous. This land was acquired through proper legal channels. I have the paperwork to prove it." "Then you have forged paperwork," Rebecca replied, opening one of her evidence boxes. "Because the county records were illegally altered to hide my client's ownership. We have the original surveys, the authentic deeds, and evidence of a conspiracy involving county officials, developers, and you, Sheriff Thompson, to steal this land through fraud and intimidation." One of the television reporters pushed forward with a microphone. "Are you saying the sheriff was involved in property fraud?" "I am saying that Sheriff Thompson orchestrated the illegal demolition of my client's family cabin to cover up the theft of his shoreline property. She used her badge to intimidate, harass, and ultimately destroy a 70-year-old family home built on legally owned land." Corinne tried to maintain control, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "This is harassment," she shouted. "I am placing all of you under arrest for trespassing and disturbing the peace." "Actually," Rebecca said, pulling out a thick stack of legal documents, "you are under arrest." She handed the papers to a state investigator who had been waiting among the crowd. "Sheriff Corinne Thompson, you are being served with criminal charges for conspiracy, fraud, abuse of power, and violation of civil rights." The yacht club guests began backing away as the reality of the situation sank in. Politicians who had come to celebrate with Corinne suddenly found urgent reasons to leave. The business leaders who had invested in the illegal development started making frantic phone calls to their lawyers. Corinne made one last desperate attempt to salvage her authority. "You cannot arrest me. I am the sheriff of this county." The state investigator stepped forward with handcuffs. "Not anymore. You are not. The governor has placed you on administrative suspension pending the outcome of this investigation." As the handcuffs clicked around Corinne's wrists, I felt a surge of emotion that was part relief, part vindication, and part something deeper. Justice. Pure, sweet justice for my demolished cabin, for months of harassment, for the attempt to steal my family's legacy. The television cameras captured every moment as Corinne was led away in handcuffs, her perfect uniform rumpled, her arrogant confidence shattered. The yacht club guests scattered like roaches when the lights come on, leaving behind their champagne glasses and their association with the biggest corruption scandal in county history. I stood on my shoreline, holding my great-grandfather's deed, watching the woman who had destroyed my cabin being driven away in the back of a state police car. The grand opening had become a grand closing, and Corinne Thompson's reign of corruption was finally over. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where my grandfather's cabin had been demolished, but everything had changed. The yacht club's illegal structures were gone, removed by court order and at the developer's expense. The shoreline had been restored to its natural state, with native plants and trees replacing the manicured lawns and concrete walkways. Sheriff Corinne Thompson had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations. Her trial had been front-page news for weeks, exposing a web of corruption that reached into county government, state environmental agencies, and private development companies. 12 other people had been indicted, including 3 county commissioners and the yacht club's primary investors. The financial settlement had been beyond my wildest dreams. The court awarded me not only the fair market value of my demolished cabin, but punitive damages for the harassment campaign, the illegal use of my shoreline property, and the profits generated by the fraudulent development. The final amount was enough to rebuild my cabin 10 times over and still have money left for my children's college funds. But more important than the money was the vindication. Every newspaper article, every television report, every court document had established the truth. I was not the crazy hermit who had refused to accept progress. I was the victim of a criminal conspiracy, a man who had fought corruption and won. Rebecca Martinez had become something of a celebrity in legal circles, her takedown of the yacht club fraud earning her recognition from the State Bar Association. She continued to represent me in the ongoing civil cases against the remaining defendants, but our relationship had evolved from attorney-client to genuine friendship. "You know what I admire most about you," she said during one of our meetings. "You never gave up. Most people would have taken Corinne's first offer and walked away. You chose to fight for what was right, even when it seemed impossible." The new cabin was rising from the foundation of the old one, built with the same attention to detail my grandfather had used 70 years earlier. But this time, I had hired the best contractors, used the finest materials, and added modern conveniences that would make the cabin comfortable for future generations. The new stone fireplace was carved from the same granite quarry my grandfather had used, but it was twice as large and surrounded by family photographs that had been saved from the demolition. My son, now in college, came home every weekend to help with the construction. Working beside him, teaching him the skills my father had taught me, I felt the circle completing itself. This was what Corinne Thompson had tried to destroy, not just a building, but the continuity of family, the passing of traditions from one generation to the next. The lake was peaceful again. The morning loons had returned, their calls echoing off the water just as they had when I was a child. Neighbors who had avoided me during Corinne's harassment campaign now stopped by to chat, bringing cookies and offers to help with the construction. The community that had been divided by fear and corruption was slowly healing. On quiet evenings, I would sit on the new dock with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. Sometimes I would think about Corinne Thompson, locked in a federal prison cell, her career destroyed, her reputation ruined, her corrupt empire reduced to ashes. I felt no pity for her. She had chosen her path when she decided to abuse her authority and steal from innocent people. The cabin was almost finished now, ready for its first Christmas, its first family gathering, its first generation of new memories. But this time, those memories would be built on a foundation of something more solid than logs and stone. They would be built on the knowledge that sometimes, when you fight for what is right, justice actually wins. As I locked up the construction site and headed back to my temporary trailer for the night, I could almost hear my grandfather's voice carried on the evening wind, telling me he was proud, telling me the family legacy was safe for another generation. Sheriff Corinne Thompson had tried to destroy us, but she had only made us stronger.